Carolyn Dube here. What's the play for today? Today, it's in my art journal and it's one very colorful conversation. By the time this page is finished, it's going to be full of speech bubbles layered one on top of the other. But before we actually create that layering effect, I'm going to start by putting a few of the speech bubbles here on the page. And these, I don't want them touching anything. I want them spread apart, and these are the ones that are going to look like they're on the top of the pile, the top of the layers of all the speech bubbles. Now you might notice that I'm flipping the stencil over sometimes, and that's so that I can have the little pointy bottom part of the speech bubble pointing in different directions. And that's the cool thing about stencils is you just flip it over and suddenly what's turned right is now turned left. So that way I can add even more variety to this. And I will tell you that it may look like I'm carefully thinking and planning exactly where each one of these speech bubbles will go, but it's really not that much thought here. What I'm doing is making sure that I've got speech bubbles throughout the page that aren't touching, and in a perfect world, I'd have a variety of sizes, but I've noticed that I've stayed more on the smaller side here. So that means I'm going to start looking at some of the larger sizes to get them to fit on the page. And should you happen to notice that you forgot an area that you didn't trace, simply put that stencil right back on there and then trace whatever you need to. You can find this stencil at StencilGirlProducts.com. And when I designed it, I wanted the speech bubbles, but I also wanted the masks. And that's why this is a set. So not only do you get the stencil that you see here, but you also get all of the shapes that go within them. So that way you have some more options for how you can play with it. Now I've just about got this layer done, and the one thing that I do want to do is another one hanging off the edge. I really like the look of having some of the speech bubbles as if they're just running off the edge of the page. Now the first layer is finished. Now it's time to just start filling in. To create the illusion that some of the speech bubbles are behind the others, when you go and trace the speech bubble, skip over anywhere where there's an existing speech bubble. So notice how I'm picking up the pen. I'm not actually tracing this entire speech bubble. I'm just doing part of it. And so that way, when I lift up the stencil, it's going to make it look like that larger speech bubble was behind those first two. This is an extremely forgiving process because you can overlap just a little bit, or you can overlap a lot. You can overlap just one other speech bubble, or you could do multiple speech bubbles. One of the things I really love about play is there are surprises along the way, things that I just didn't expect to happen. After I finished this speech bubble and I lifted up the stencils, I looked at it, I actually debated stopping right there and leaving the page like that because there's something that I really liked about that look. But that thought passed and I went back to let's just fill this whole thing in. Now, because this is a repetitive process, you get the idea of how it works. I am going to speed the camera up so that we can get to the color portion. There are two different categories of shapes on the stencil. The first category is the oval or roundish kind of ones, and then the other ones are the rectangular shapes. And the rectangular shapes, there's something special you can do with those. You have a lot of flexibility, a lot of options when it comes to those. Because you can actually change the size of things when you need them. Did you notice how I made that one taller there? Well, let me slow down the camera here so I can show you on this one. I want this one to actually be a little bit shorter. So I'm just tracing sort of the left-hand side of it. Then I'm going to slide it down where I want the end to be, and then just trace that little end bit there. And so now I've been able to make it the size, the length that I wanted it to be. That means if you ever need one to fit in a certain area, the rectangular ones, you can make them taller, you can make them shorter, you can make them wider, you can make them more narrow. It's really easy to adjust those. What's this pen that I'm using to do this, and why did I pick that one? Well, this pen allows me to put dark permanent lines on here. And I wanted a little bit of a darker line, which is why I went for a felt tip marker. And I also wanted something that was going to be permanent because I'm going to put wet color on top of this, and I don't want it to smear and run. This particular pen has taken the place of the Sharpie marker in my studio. The thing that I like about it is it seems a little bit juicier to me, and it's stayed juicy. I've got that nice juicy black line, even though this isn't a brand new pen. I can't remember the brand name of this pen, but I'll have it linked down below in the supplies for anybody that's interested. This page is getting pretty full of speech bubbles, so I have to look pretty hard to find any place where I can tuck one in here and there. And I think this is going to be the last one that I can get on there, so now I'm ready to bring in the color. I'm going with watercolors for this today, but guess what? I think you know what I'm going to say. You can use whatever art supplies you have on hand, whatever it is you like to use. Are you a colored pencil person? Then use those. Do you like markers? Color away. Paint, watercolors, whatever it is you like, you just color in each one of the speech bubbles. There are two big reasons why I chose watercolors to do this. The first is it allows me to have some variation. As I'm coloring this in, you get all this great sort of watercolory look of it's a little more intense here, it's a little less there. It's very easy to just make an interesting space that way. The other reason is how I can control the color. So if I want to have a brighter or more intense color, I use less water. If you use more water, it ends up being a softer color. And speaking of colors, I'm placing the colors on here randomly and also not randomly at the same time. And what I mean by that is, like when I put the teal there for the first color, this yellow, I very randomly did it. But as I'm doing it, there is one thing that I'm thinking about, and that is I don't want the same color touching itself anywhere. So I don't want yellow ever touching yellow. I don't want blue ever touching blue. Coloring in the speech bubbles was the meditative portion of the play. It was just really relaxing, moving that color around and filling things in. And while I was doing that, my mind kind of wandered for what these speech bubbles stacked one on top of the other might be meaning here. What was the message my art journal page was trying to give me? Having all of those speech bubbles one on top of the other really gave me an excited feeling. Like there are people talking that are just so excited. They're all just going at it, trying to share what they've got to say. Then it made me think about people talking over other people, shouting loudly so others can't be heard. And then it became some reading between the lines. So the things that people are saying, what do they really mean? And that got me thinking a lot about how it's not always so much what somebody says, but how they make you feel. But what about you? Let me know in the comments what comes to your mind when you see all of these speech bubbles stacked one on top of the other. A little bit later in the video, I'll reveal to you which one of them stuck in my head and which one I used to decide what was going to come next on the page. But because of the one that I did choose, there was something that, well, didn't go quite as I wanted it to go, but it was a really easy fix. Oh, and here's a little tip for you about coloring in the different speech bubbles is you'll notice that I'm kind of bouncing around the page and doing one at the bottom, one at the top, one over here, one over there. Because what that does is allow time for that speech bubble to not be quite so juicy, to dry a bit before I do the one next to it. And that's the big reason why my colors are not bleeding together. If you're using a lot of water and you're doing the speech bubbles right next to each other, one after the other, you do run the risk of that color kind of bleeding around. Now, that doesn't mean that's bad. It's just what watercolor will do. So if you want more of those crisp lines like what I'm getting where the colors are staying in their own speech bubble, you want to make sure that they're a little bit dry before you put the next color next to it. Of course, now that I say that out loud, it's got me thinking about doing that intentionally to really let the colors run between the speech bubbles, because that's got me thinking about the symbolism of how what somebody says, how that colors the other person, how it colors their world, their interpretation, the words, the thoughts that they might be having. With all the symbolism possibilities here with these speech bubbles, which one did I go with to decide what comes next on this page? Well, I decided to go with the one of reading between the lines. Before I do go on to the next layer on this page, I am going to let that watercolor completely and totally dry. Because the idea of reading between the lines, the things that aren't said that are actually felt, that's what really jumped out at me for the meaning of this page. I'm not actually going to put the speech or the text inside the speech bubbles. I'm going to put it around it in pockets here on the page. And the reason for that is because of some conversations I've had with some very dear friends recently. Now, these weren't philosophical discussions. We were not planning out how to bring about world peace. We were talking about things like the Witcher TV show or Pokemon Go. But even though what we were talking about wasn't really important, I actually did feel important to them. I felt the closeness of our friendship. And so that's what I'm capturing here in my scribbled journaling. Now, after I started doing the journaling here in this white area, I realized that I didn't want it to be open and flow over the entire page. What I really wanted was another speech bubble there to sort of block it off and close it in, because I wanted that white space completely encased inside those colorful speech bubbles. Now, this is going to be a really easy fix, but I want to get all the other journaling on here done, so I just have this one last little area to deal with at the end. All I'm going to do is bring the stencil back, find one of the speech bubbles that'll fill the space that I want it to close in that area for me. And the cool part is I don't even have to have that much of a speech bubble there, just enough to create that sort of wall to completely enclose in that white space. Out comes the permanent pen. And I quite surprised myself by how much thought I put into what color to put there, as if this was some big major decision that the fate of the world was hanging in the balance over what color to put there. I mean, I knew it couldn't be yellow or pink because those were touching it, so that only left me with a few options of what I wanted to use. And so I was like, well, do I want to put teal? Do I want to put orange? Which one do I want to do? And whenever small decisions start to feel really big to me, I just have to laugh at myself, because really, this is the kind of thing that's worth a lot of mental energy? Nope, it's a pick one and let's go. Usually I put a title on a page, that kind of thing, but on this one, I'm going to intentionally leave it off and leave it open to interpretation, because these speech bubbles, they can mean a whole bunch of different things to different people. Thanks so much for joining me for today's play. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd so appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. And of course, if you'd like to see more of my videos, hit that subscribe button. That way you'll know as soon as I've got a new one out. Now, in this video, I did work with a stencil. And by the way, if you're new to stencils, this is not the only way you can use a stencil. There are gaboodles of ways to use them. And if you'd like to go deeper on stencils, if you'd like to know more about them, you can check out my online workshop called The Joy of Stenciling. I think you've got an idea what that's about just from the title. Well, thanks so much for letting me be a part of your colorful journey.